Here at Practical Church Planting, we get to talk to a lot of church planters all the time about planting new churches, and so we've learned quite a few things. And so today on Practical Church Planting, we're going to share with you 12 opinions that church planters need to hear.
Thanks for joining us again today on Practical Church Planting. We're going to be giving you 12 opinions that church planters need to hear.
So we got 12,
Yes.
So that's a lot.
Yeah.
Well, I guess we have a lot of opinions since we have a podcast.
That's right.
Need to hear sounds very aggressive,
Yeah.
but why not?
If you want our opinions, then you need to hear this.
That's right. And we want to be clear, these are not spiritual. People can disagree. This is not a litmus test of faithfulness. This is just from things we've seen and experienced over the years, talking to other church planters, things that we've seen. We think these are good ideas.
Mm-hmm.
So 12 opinions of ours.
And we call them 12 opinions, not 12 facts.
That's right.
Because there are opinions. So disagree with all of them if you want, but this is what
And
they
the
are.
ones that you like, obviously, were my idea. The ones that you think are controversial were all Brian's idea.
True.
Obviously.
True.
So here we go. Now, some of these we've talked about in various episodes. We're just combining them all here.
Yep.
Some of these I don't know that we've ever said before.
Yeah, some of them might be new.
12 opinions. If you're a church planter or a pastor or a ministry leader, this is what we have experienced.
Buckle up.
Number one, maybe we'll start with the hottest take, although I don't really think it's a hot take,
Yeah.
but whatever, is you should look at your people's giving. Specifically, like lead pastor, you should look at people's giving. The vast majority of people, maybe, I don't know, that because this is what people say, it's whatever. It's the thing everyone does. Will say things like, I don't know what people give. I was talking to a pastor a couple days ago about some stuff, and he's like, only the elders know. He said he only knows what his elders gives. He doesn't know the rest of the church, all that sort of thing. And I get the heart behind it. I started that way when we started New City. Well, no, I don't think I ever did because I didn't. I thought that I was supposed to. That's what happened.
Yeah.
Because everyone else says they do. And I understand, like, the main reason in what I've seen from other people that they don't do it is that they're afraid that if they look at what people give, they'll treat people differently. Mm-hmm. My very strong pushback to that is you already know about maybe the sin or the issues of your people in your church already. And I would ask you, do you look at them differently? I'm assuming you would say no.
Right.
So that's one pushback. The second pushback is you talk about all stuff with the people in your church, their sex life, their marriage, their work, their job, like all these things that are vitally important to their life and their faith. And we won't talk about money, or you're afraid to look at their money when we all know money is a massive indicator of somebody's faithfulness in Jesus, like their spiritual maturity. Not necessarily how much they give, but like based on how much they make. Are they faithful? Are they consistent? It's a good marker if they increase it. I think it says a lot for someone to notice if they increase their giving. To someone to reach out and say, hey, I noticed that you've done this. I thank you. And at the same time, if somebody gives less or starts giving a lot more inconsistently, typically it's a sign that there's something wrong, not because you want to get them to give again, but because you want to see how they're doing. And so I don't see a compelling reason not to look at your people's giving. Yeah. If your reason is because you're afraid you're just going to treat them differently, I would submit to you that maybe try it for a month. And I guarantee you won't, because we all know people are imperfect. And again, if that's like the reason you want to treat people differently, like I think you got to be able to lead people well.
Yeah.
And so you've got to know what's going on in their lives. And so I would tell you, don't spiritualize it by saying, well, I'm not going to look at people's giving. Like, you're their leader, especially for the lead pastor. So I would highly encourage you to check people's giving and to see how people are doing.
Yeah, like you said, I understand the heart behind why people think that they maybe shouldn't, but after hearing your kind of defense or argument for it, I have a hard time seeing the other side. Like, I feel like if you're going to shepherd people and pastor people, you need to know where they're at. Yep. And I think that kind of, it goes inherently with, I don't know, it's kind of one of the agreements someone enters in with you when they become like a partner or member of the church, that you're going to be leading them, and part of that is financially. And so I think you need to know where people are, and part of that is looking at where their generosity is landing. Yep. And I just think that that's something that needs to be done.
And we ask, if you're a part of New City, you do have to commit to give financially. We don't ask for a percentage, but how am I supposed to have a conversation with somebody if I don't know? Yep. And I just think it's, everything else. I don't understand why you wouldn't know this, especially when it has so much to do with someone's spiritual faith and walk. And it's also when people are upset about something and they want to have a difficult conversation, or they want to complain about something, which I'm all for hearing what your people want. I think we should do that, and We should expect that with the territory. We shouldn't complain that our people complain because that's what happens. Anyway, it's good to know, do they give? Like, are they actually invested in, not because you treat them differently, but like if someone doesn't give, and here's what you'll find if you actually look at the giving, many times the people who complain the most don't give anything or give the least.
Yeah.
And so clearly they're not invested. And it's not that you don't hear them or care for them, but you're not making decisions around people who aren't saying like, I'm invested in, and this is my church. And so I just, if you want to lead people well, I would say you should look at what your people are giving, because you know everything else that's going on. Why would you avoid such a big area of everyone's life?
Yeah, I don't see any reason to look at everything else, and I don't think there's any other area in like your people's lives that we would look at and say that's not something you should talk about. Like, it's everything else is pretty much generally agreed upon. You should talk about their marriage, like you said. You should talk about all their sin struggles. You should talk about everything else. But money's like the one thing where we shouldn't know what's going on. And I just don't think that's right. So, yeah.
So there you go. You should look at people's giving. Number 2, this is just a hill I will die on.
I was about to phrase it the exact same
There
way
you
for
go.
you.
Never say you are busy.
Yep.
Never say you're busy, ever. In fact, it was funny. We had someone over yesterday, and Christina asked them if they have a busy week, and I just can't help anymore. I said, don't say that word in my house. Now, obviously, I was not being. It sounds really bad.
Yeah.
It's a joke. Christina knows it was a joke, but I just like I hate that word. With a righteous anger, because it's so, in my opinion, it's so passive to say that I'm busy, because no one can argue with that. Nobody knows what it means. Like, there's no what does busy actually mean? Everyone's definition is whatever they want it to be, and it can be such an excuse not to work hard. And you'll find that people do this to me, even though New City's not big, all the time, particularly if they're newer. Like, even on a Sunday, if we're talking for like more than 2 minutes, or if like they want to meet with me, they always say things like, "I know you're really busy." Like, so I understand you don't want people to think you don't work, but I don't care anymore. I always tell people I am not busy. Like, last week I had lunch with a guy, and we'd been there for over an hour, and we were talking. He's like, "I know you're really," like, "I don't want to hold you," but he had like another question. I was like, I told him, I said, "This is my job. I'm here as long as you want to be." Now, there are things I need to do, but I just hate that word, because our culture says it's like a budget. People don't think they have money, but most people don't have a budget. So how do you know? You don't know. If you don't schedule your time, of course you're going to be busy. If your iPhone says you're on your phone 4 hours a week, and you can tell the last 3 seasons of shows that you binged, you're not busy. So I would just say, you personally don't use the word busy. And then when people say, "I know you're busy," always correct them. I know, again, you want people to know that you're not being lazy, but I just think, and not to spiritualize it, but Jesus wasn't busy. John Mark Comer's book, The Ruthless Elimination of Hurry, was so transformational for me, especially with this word around busyness. So I would just say, never say you're busy. For you, here's how I view it. If I tell someone I'm busy, for me, what I'm telling them is I'm lazy. That's how I view it for myself. I'm not saying that's other people. So I refuse to use that word, and I don't let people tell me that I'm too busy for them. So just get that out of your vocabulary.
Yeah, I think that there's obviously seasons where you're going to have a lot like you can have
You have full plate?
You can have a full schedule.
You have a lot going on?
Yes.
Yes.
But like you said, I think that the kind of cultural understanding of the word busy has become this is the blanket response.
Yep.
And it warrants no further explanation. And so it's not that from a definition standpoint, it's not that you literally can't be busy.
Right.
But I wouldn't use that as a response of somebody, and don't let people, like you said, use that as use it as a kind of defense for you to not schedule things with you. Of you're busy. You can have a lot of things going on. That's why we talk a lot about having a structured calendar and using tools like Calendly and things like that, where even though you may have a full schedule, you can still figure out how to fit things in, because you obviously have told your time what you're doing and things like that. But just using the blanket of, I'm busy, things are really busy right now, then I think it kind of it makes people look at you as if I can't get time with you, because you're always talking about how busy. Especially as like a pastor, if you're always like, man, ministry's just, things are really busy at the church. There's just a lot of stuff going on at the church, and not giving any kind of qualifications of what's going on. That doesn't mean you can't talk about like struggles, and if you're literally like struggling with time, you can't talk about it with anybody. But if you're not giving any kind of definition of what that means, that just tells someone, don't ask for your time because you don't have it.
Yep. So again, it doesn't mean you drop everything you're doing right away because you've got stuff going on, but you're not busy. You have things going on, and here's my anecdotal evidence. The people who also say they're the most busy are the people who I just know don't spend their time well. So like, I know people who have a lot going on, people who are more high-level executives or people that are successful, and in terms of the demands on their time, they got more going on.
They got a lot of demands.
And I don't hear the word busy from them. I just don't. Like maybe occasionally here and there, but it's not an excuse not to do things. There's also the what the quote or whatever that if you want something done, give it to someone who's busy. Because it's like the people who actually do stuff, manage their time, whatever, and they don't use the excuse of busy. So I would just say, don't use it. And it's just good for your soul to remind yourself, again, because especially when, pastor gatherings and stuff, we all talk about how like busy and tired we are. Like don't buy into that. If you're busy, that means that something is wrong and needs to be fixed. That is what that means. And so you're not to over spiritualize it, but the way of Jesus is not busy. And so if we're always busy, we've got a problem. And how are we supposed to lead people in holiness if we're not pursuing it ourselves? So just don't use the word. That is my passionate defense.
I'm surprised that wasn't number one or last one to lead up to.
I don't know. So don't use it. Number 3, be intentional about getting a woman on staff. So I want to just say this. I'm not one of those people, maybe this is bad or good, whatever, that believes like the workforce needs to be 50% man and 50% women. Cultural differences, I'm not trying to be stereotypical, whatever, but like just a blanket statement, generally speaking, I know women typically like to be with the kids more than men do in terms of like a stay home type thing. I'm not saying it's right or wrong for anybody. I'm just saying like how are the natural predisposition of human beings is women are more nurturing than men. And so like I understand men also cannot give birth. So like there are times where like you have to take off of work because you're having a child and men don't have to do that. So there are things that make it to where I don't think it's ever going to be 50-50 just because of natural biology, desires that people have, whatever. That being said, it can be really easy to unintentionally only have like your main leaders and volunteers and staff be men, because if you're a man, that's who you're most comfortable with. That's who you have the most relationships with. The church is more than 50% not male. It's female.
Right.
And so going out of your way, we had an episode on this, I don't know, somewhat recently about women in leadership or something that we talk more about this.
Yeah.
But I think it's on you to actually be more intentional to go after and to try to find women in positions of leadership, especially in the church, because a lot of people assume that they just can't be. And just psychologically speaking, if you look at the data, men are more likely to ask for raises. Men are more likely to take risks. Men are more likely to apply for jobs that they don't have experience for than women are. And so all that to say, especially if you're a man, you got to be intentional about trying to find spaces and start the conversations of getting women in positions of staff, particularly on your church, so that you're not stuck with just like 5 men doing things all the time and missing out on the perspectives and the gifts of women.
Yeah, I think if you kind of shift the reasoning, like I think everyone would agree, like, yes, I want my staff to be more diverse, whether that's gender-wise or racial-wise. But I think if you kind of boil down to the reason of why you want it, it's a little easier to make it happen. If it's just, I want women on my staff because to make it look like we're diverse. I think that's going to be tough for you to make that happen. But if you actually boil it down to, I actually want other opinions. I don't want, just like groupthink of we all act and look the exact same and are the same gender, and so we make the same decisions, but we want more diversity on our team. I think it'll be a little easier to have those conversations of why you actually want it if you actually figure out for yourself, why do you want this? Why do you want it? And so getting more diversity on your team is, I don't know, I don't think anyone would disagree, but I think it's something that you need to pursue earlier on, and that the longer you let it go, especially if you're watching this and you're getting ready to plant and you're like a one-man show, it might be hard to kind of wrap your head around. But as your staff grows, and if it grows of just men, the bigger it gets, the harder it's going to be to bring your first woman on board. And so I would say make it a priority from day one. That doesn't mean your first hire has to be, but just make sure it's a priority as something on your mind and on your team's mind, that this isn't, if you're kind of the way things have fallen, a team of all men, this isn't the way we want it long term. And I don't think, like you said, I don't think that there necessarily needs to be, we need to have this percentage of this percentage of, a certain percentage women. I think different positions are, lend more to different genders and things like that. And that's just kind of the way things fall. But having it be that we don't want it to be all of one type of person, and we want there to be more diversity in our staff from the beginning, having that mindset, even if that's not something you can make happen from day one, I think will help.
Yeah, so it's probably not going to happen on accident.
Yes.
So that's the thing. It's like, I just wanted it to happen. That's not going to make it happen. I don't know what number it is. It's within 10 episodes of this. I think we have our, you can look back. We have the episode on like how to develop women leaders in your church, something like that. So you can feel like, how do I do this? But it also reminds me of like, especially if you're white and you want to have a more ethnically diverse church, well, just wanting it doesn't make it happen. You've got to like have steps of things that you're actively doing or trying to do. So all that to say, you've got to be intentional about getting a woman on staff as early as possible, so that you can not just be dominated by one gender for a long period of time.
Yeah, and I'll also say I was skimming through the list because I can't remember if we made this its own point, but I don't think we did. So sorry if I step on the toes of another opinion. But that's your default shouldn't be, well, then my wife will be on staff. I think I don't want to make a blanket statement of your wife shouldn't, because obviously there are situations where your wife may genuinely want to be on staff, and then I think it's good to make sure that happens.
Yep.
But also, I think that the default can be my wife will just be on staff, and she may be okay with it, even if it's not something she really wants, because she may have more of a servant's heart and wants to help out where she sees a need. But if your wife genuinely wants to be on staff, I think that's great. But I don't think the default should be my wife is just gonna be on staff because she's the pastor's wife, and so that means that she runs these specific things.
Yeah.
So that's kind of something. I think every marriage is different. I don't have like a blanket piece of advice, but make sure it's something that you actually want before it happens. And if she doesn't want, obviously there's no reason to push it. If she doesn't want it, she's not on staff. That's it.
So be intentional about getting a non-spouse woman on staff.
There you go.
There you go. Number 4, preach through books of the Bible. Now, again, we're pro whatever. Topical, exposition, do whatever you want.
Pro whatever.
But I guess, in terms of like what's acceptable, I'm not one of those people. Whatever, do whichever you feel convicted to do. However, our opinion is books and verses are much better than topical series, and we do both, but primarily through books of the Bible. And here's what, beyond just like, I just think it's whatever. I think there's a lot of reasons I would say for this one. Here's the main one for this conversation: is that if you want to affect and impact people in your culture, and you don't want them to think you're just sharing your opinion, you've got to be reading the text and preaching the text. So, for example, we hear all the time, like, how are pastors supposed to compete with, like, the news cycle and social media where people do hours a week, and then you've got, 1 hour on a Sunday. How are you supposed to compete with that? And I get that that's hard. The best way to compete with that is to not just share your opinion. We all know news at this point is opinion. Social media, it's not factual. It's opinion. It's what you want to do. And so what'll happen is if they're watching that, they come to church and they hear you talk about sex or marriage or money, and you're doing a series and you're pulling verses from here and here. I'm not saying there's anything wrong with it, but it can come across like this is my opinion. Now, it may be a biblical, maybe biblical, but it looks like that. When you're going through, books or verses, chapters at a time, then you can hit maybe some of these opinionated, tense topics, and it can come across as, of course, it's all of our opinion if you're preaching it, but hopefully it's like, this isn't just something I made up. Here's what it says, and you can disagree with what the text and what God says, but it's not my opinion. Like, you just need to. So, as Providence would have it, this past Sunday, we're in 1 Thessalonians. We did chapter 4, verse 1 through 12. 1 Thessalonians is all about Paul basically saying your faith should lead you to action. And everybody believes that, right? We should all love. That's great. Well, then he gives a very tense example and really all of human history, sexual immorality. That if you actually want to love people, you will refrain from sexual immorality. He uses words like, this is God's will for you, for your sanctification. If you want to become more like Jesus, you will do it. So we had a sermon, and it was not, it wasn't condemning, but it was like, this is what it says. But God loves you. There's full of grace. But if you're a follower of Jesus, you have to decide, do you trust what God says, or do you want to do your own thing? And if you want to do your own thing, that's okay. But you need to know that it's not ambiguous. Our justification can be, but like sin, or God's design for sex and sexual morality and his design for sexual flourishing is extremely clear in Scripture. And so we were able to talk about the topic where, people living together, cohabitating here at New City, just like everywhere in the world. And I know some people maybe didn't like what it was said, but my hope is that they couldn't say, well, that was just Dylan's opinion. Yeah. That is what 1 Thessalonians says. I can like it or I can dislike it, but that's, I think, the biggest strength of preaching through the Bible is when you get to these topics. And then the rest of Thessalonians, the next 2 or 3 weeks, we're talking about when Jesus returns. And I don't know if you've had this. Even in our church this past year, I've had people email me, like, watch this prophecy. Jesus. And so I'm actually kind of nervous about it. But again, I get to approach it as, it's not like my opinion. Here's what it says. Here's why you're wrong. I'm not going to say it like that, but,
Well, kind of.
And I just think if you just do sermon series on these topics, it can come across as my opinion, or people can feel called out, even if you're not trying to do that. But when it's like, it's here, we're just going through the verse. Obviously, I'm not have anyone in mind. I'm just talking about it. And so I just think, man, if you really want to impact people and compete, quote unquote, with all the opinions they hear throughout the week, try to give something that's not just your opinion and show them in a way that it's not just your opinion.
Yeah, I think everyone can point to churches that lean more on the topical
Yep.
side of things that are theologically sound, that are Bible like that we would agree with on most
Right.
things that obviously do really well and are huge. But I think especially if you're a church planter, younger church, it really helps to just preach through books of the Bible for the majority of the time for a number of reasons. Obviously, the reasons Dylan said, but also especially if you're younger, like maybe if you're planting in your 20s. I think I'm not saying this is right or wrong, but I think that especially like my own sinful nature comes into play. I have a hard time looking at someone who's significantly younger than me, giving advice on giving what seems like advice, I should say, not just advice, but what seems like advice, which sometimes that's what topical series can come across as, on things that they don't have a lot of life experience in. So, for instance, before I had kids, I had a problem. I would have had a problem. This never came up. But I would have had a problem preaching on parenting because I didn't have. I didn't have kids, and so I would have had a problem preaching on it. But if it came up in text that we were talking about, I'm just preaching what the Bible says. If someone who's only been married for a very short time, I just have a hard time if they're just like, we're gonna do a marriage series. And everything they say might be completely right. I'm not saying I disagree with them necessarily, but I just have a hard time looking at someone it appears as if they're preaching their own opinion and taking little from the text. Where if we're just preaching through the Bible, and like you said, it comes up in the text, I got nothing to say to that. Now, I'm not saying that view is right, and that there is definitely wrong things about that view, but that's part of just my own human nature. And so I think, especially if you're younger, you can take some of those out where people may look at it, especially if you have an older congregation or people in your congregation that are older, may look at it and say, I don't know if I should take the advice of someone who's much younger, which, we had conversations like that, not just in New City, but before that, of people that were older that were talking to about coming to the church plants that we were with. Like, I've always sat under people who were my age or older. And so listening to someone who's 20, 30 years younger than me, I struggle with. And so, and I think that struggle is just amplified if you're always preaching things that appear to be more opinion than text.
I think it's a great point for older people. It's like, well, it's easy for them, right or wrong. It's easy for them to assume it's your opinion. Again, and sometimes people, the pushback was like preaching through the Bible is boring. Like boring sermons are boring. Like it's not by default that it's like, if you're boring, you're just going to be boring. It doesn't matter. Like the first long series we did 1 Corinthians. It took like 40-ish weeks a couple years ago. We broke it up like once or twice. And I remember somebody who from a church background that didn't go through books of the Bible was like, I can't believe we're going to do that. And their thought was like, that's going to be boring. Yeah. And like, it's boring preaching. At the end of it, they actually really like it. And now they told me like about a month ago that they enjoy that we do, like we did Exodus for 35-ish weeks. Yep. We're going to do Mark in the fall. Who knows how long that's going to be. So they like it. And I would say this too, some of the churches that are really large and have really good communicators and maybe more topical style, when you lead a large church, there's like, and someone walks into that, or they just know that there's multi-site, whatever, they have the speaker, right or wrong, just has more credibility in their eyes. And so they're more likely to think that, oh, maybe this person knows what they're talking about. If you're a new church planter and you're young and there's not a lot of people, I'm not saying this right or wrong, just people's credibility, like, why would I listen to you? I don't have a reason to listen to you. And so preaching through books of the Bible allows people to say, this is not just me and my opinion, this is what this says, and you can do with it what you want. So.
And there's ways, and like there's ways to do it in a not boring way. Obviously, it all comes down to how you're communicating. Like the majority of the Bible isn't boring. Like if you're preaching things well, then most books that you can preach through aren't going to be boring. Yeah. Most. Some might be a struggle, but if you're just planting and this is your first one going through, obviously it makes more sense to maybe start with some shorter books. Like maybe your first few months of the church, not to dive into something like Exodus, because there are going to be parts where it's a struggle to preach through in an engaging way just because it's a little bit drier of text. And so if you kind of are a little bit more strategic about how you start things off, I think you'll be setting your church plant up to kind of expect to be preaching through the Bible, but also not setting yourself up for failure of trying to tackle the most difficult book right up front.
Yeah, that's a good point. And last thing I'll say, when you preach through books, don't preach like a verse. Like, don't do that. Preach multiple verses. Don't
stop at each
your
verse.
whole sermon doing one verse. Just don't do that. Maybe when you're older and you're a better communicator, whatever, but do sections at a time to get people.
I remember when we went through 1 Corinthians, that was the first long series we did, and I think we kind of prefaced it with our people about like this is going to be an eternity. And I remember the first week you were preaching, and however the first sentences,
three verses I think is
well,
or something like
but
that.
like the first, however it starts. From the Apostle Paul, whatever, but like you're reading and you said like from the Apostle Paul, and then you're like, all right, we're gonna stop there, or just start with like the word Paul or something like that. You're like, Paul, we're gonna stop there. And I remember thinking like, this is going to be an eternity. Like, we're stopping at one word. But it was great. Like, honestly, like and I grew up in a church that was not that way. Like, I grew up in a more seeker sensitive church where it's mostly topical. And if it was a book series, it was like a short book, or it was just like touching on topics of the book. But I thought it was awesome. And now it's something that I expect. So
Yeah, there you go.
people will like it.
Number 4. Number 5. Oh, that was preach through books of the Bible. Number 5. I don't feel like this is a hot take, but I guess it is because a lot of people do it. Don't preach longer than 35 minutes. Just don't.
Yep.
You're not good enough. People aren't going to remember.
Yep.
Especially if you're younger and don't have a lot of preaching experience, and you go 48 minutes. I'm just telling you, this is like, and this is all contextual. I'm talking like America. Like, you can do whatever you want. If it's a house church thing, or if you're in another country, I'm just saying normal. I'm not saying this is wrong. I'm just saying in our current context, for what I see, I personally, if I was just in the workforce, I would not go to a church with a church planter who's preaching 45 minutes. Because it's like, you're not good enough. You're rambling. It was so funny to me. I felt a little bit vindicated. We might have said this in previous episodes. When COVID started and people started preaching shorter sermons, like some of the guys, especially Acts 29, so people like to preach forever in Acts 29.
Yeah.
Some of them do. And they talked about how they were shortening their sermons, and they're keeping them that way. They found it more engaging. I'm like, well, thank you.
Really?
Because you're not... Like in our case from Acts 29, Matt Chandler. You're not Matt Chandler.
Yeah.
You don't get to preach 45 minutes and keep people engaged. In fact, I'm doing this thing right now with a couple of guys where we're giving each other feedback on our sermons, like we're watching each other's. And one of the guys I was going to ask to do it with me I looked at one on their YouTube channel. The guy I know is like 48 minutes. I was like, no, that ain't fair. I'm not watching you for 48 minutes, and you only have to watch me for like 34 minutes. I can do that. It's just not good enough. And at the end of the day, you want to compel people to action, to be moved, to listen to you. If you bore people, even if like your first 35 minutes are great and your last 10 minutes are not that great, it'll kind of ruin the whole sermon because people are bored, they're disengaged. There's a lot to say about this, but if you want to engage your people well, I would go shorter. Shorter often means more work too, because it's easy to say, all the stuff I studied was great. I want to tell people everything. You've got to learn what to take out. You've got to keep people engaged, and it's just, we're humans. We doze off. We don't pay attention. And if you go a long time, especially if you're young and inexperienced, even if you're experienced and you're not highly gifted, in our current cultural context, I would say 35 minutes or less for the vast majority of people.
I mean, pretty much if you're someone who would listen to this podcast, 35 minutes or less.
Yeah.
There are people that obviously are the exception, but those aren't people that are probably going to be listening to this podcast. Because if you're not like in this really top echelon of communicators, it's just not, it's unrealistic to expect people to stay engaged for an extremely long period of time.
Yep.
Think about it. This is the only place that people go where they have to engage with one person speaking for a long period of time outside of school, outside of like a professor. And so to expect someone, this isn't like this is a terrible analogy, but this isn't engaging like television or something like that. Like, you are the sole communicator trying to keep someone engaged for potentially close to an hour, and that's just unrealistic. And so, like you said, it is much harder to make something shorter and engaging, but it's just something that needs to be done. I'm not a good enough communicator to keep someone engaged for that long. I wish I could speak for an hour on a text. I mean, just to unload everything and just vomit words on people for an hour, but that's not engaging. That's not communicating the text well. That's just dumping everything on them.
And it's hard too, because a lot of the really well-known preachers preach longer.
Oh yeah,
but they're well-known because they're very talented. Like, not just skilled as in but they just have natural talent and ability. And I think especially if you don't have as much experience preaching and you're preaching 45, 50 minutes, you're not as good with transitions. You're not good with illustrations and stories and bringing people back in. It's just like you talking about the Bible for 50 minutes. So, and this is not a call to be shallow. Like we just said, we spent 40 plus weeks in 1 Corinthians, 30 something weeks in Exodus. We're going to do we're going to do it. It's just talk about it, explain it. Don't talk about every single commentary. Let me quote 5 theologians. People do not care, and they're not going to listen. And so you want to do it in a winsome and compelling way. Go deep, but just keep it within that time frame, and people will more likely stay engaged. You'd rather have people tell you, and I like when people tell me this, like, I wish you would preach longer, because there's some people that that follow Jesus and they like this Bible, or maybe they never been to a church that like preaches through books of the Bible. Like, there's someone who's here that told me that recently. They didn't grow up in church, and so they're like, he's like, my only complaint is I wish you would preach longer, and I get it, but you're not the only one there, and I would rather you want that than being, I wish you were done so I could leave.
Yes, and those people are generally in the minority. Like most people are happy with that amount of time.
But it's hard because then they tell you that. Do you think you should preach longer?
Yes.
No, they're the minority.
Yes, they're the minority. But like, especially if you're newer, this is something like, or like if you have planted and are inviting other church planters. Like I was talking to someone who had recently planted a church and invited someone in and didn't tell them how long they should preach for, and they went like, their service went over a half hour longer than it normally does. And so set expectations with others who aren't as experienced as well. Like you may know this, but then if someone comes on, I think we can kind of default to, if they're younger or newer, the challenge is they're probably going to preach maybe a little bit too short.
Yep.
Which honestly, hopefully that's true, and probably is in a lot of cases. But set the expectation of don't just go forever, because if you're not as experienced, you can accidentally just continue to go and just unload things, and it's just not communicating the text well.
Yep.
Even and the other pushback I think we hear is like, you're not allowing the Holy Spirit to move if you put like strict timelines on it. But I think that's I don't know. I think that's limiting to the Holy Spirit to say he can't work in 35 minutes. So I don't know.
And if it's good and you're actually studying and it goes longer every once in a while, that's fine. But just to always be like, I'm going to go. I mean, what's the difference between 35 and 48 minutes? You're still picking a time frame that you're trying to stay within.
Right.
So just make it a better time frame.
Yep.
All right, next one. I don't know where we are on the list. Here we go. Next one.
Somewhere
have
in
a simple discipleship plan. Hopefully this is not a hot take, but rather, we talk about this in other episodes, would actually make you feel encouraged. Mm-hmm. Again, what you hear often in pastors and church planners, like, what's your discipleship plan? What's your way of making disciples? And you feel like you have to have this really complex 5-step, do this, study, do this thing, and it sounds great, but only 1% of your people are actually doing it. Mm-hmm. And if very few people of a percentage of your church is doing it, it's not a plan. It's fine to have your own side thing with a couple of people, but that's not a plan. And so it's okay that it's simple. In fact, last week I had lunch with a guy who is new, and he's older. He's got a PhD. Mm-hmm. And as I'm talking, I was like, oh, this guy, because you don't know if they're new. Like I was like, this guy gets it. Like he gets what living on mission's about. Like he loves Jesus. And one of the questions he asked me is, what is your discipleship plan? And when we started, I would have been very intimidated. I was like, oh, I got to have something impressive for him. Yeah. And I basically said something to the effect of, that's a great question. In my experience, I was let me just bring you into my world for a second. I talk to pastors all the time, and they ask this question, and they have this really, like I just said, this really intense thing that nobody does. At New City, we ask people to do a very simple thing, a few things, and our thought is if you are doing these things, you're actually growing closer to Jesus. Mm. And I explain, to be a partner at New City, you have to give financially, you have to serve in a group, you have to serve in some capacity, you have to be in a community group, and you just have to commit to say, hey, I'm going to live out my faith. Mm-hmm. But it's really just serve, give, and be in a group. Now, that's not... You can say that doesn't sound like a lot. If you are actually actively doing those things, and if you're a partner in New City, we follow up with you every year. Mm-hmm. My belief is that you will be growing closer to Jesus. Yeah. Because a lot of the time we think discipleship is intellectual study, and it's not. And that's a great thing, but like the way of Jesus is not just having a lot of knowledge, it's living out what you know to be true. And so whatever it is, for us, it's our partnership process, serve, give, be in a group, live out your faith. But we check, like I said, we look at people's giving. I look at people's giving. Like it's not a weird thing for us. So whatever it is, it's not bad to have maybe you have maybe 2 or 3 people or a group of people that you're taking through something deeper, but that's not a plan if it only refers to a couple of people. Mm-hmm. So don't feel like you have to have an answer the next time you ask, because all the pastors like to have a really cool answer for this. A simple plan that's workable that people actually do. That is what I would recommend that you do for your discipleship plan.
Yeah, I don't have a lot to add. If people aren't doing it, then it's the whole point of a discipleship plan is not to sound the most impressive to other pastors, but sometimes that's the way it comes across. Like, who cares what anyone else thinks about your discipleship plan if you're discipling your people? Yep. And if people think that it's not good enough, if it's working and your people are moving closer to Jesus, who cares what anyone else says? Yep. And so if that means like we do, where people need to be in a group, need to be giving, need to be serving. And if they're doing all those things, they will inherently be moving closer to Jesus. Yep. And if that's what you see work in your situation, then do that. We don't need to overcomplicate things. We want people to move closer to Jesus. We don't want to give them a laundry list of things to do just to make it look good. Yeah,
yeah. We don't want people spending 5 nights a week doing church stuff. Mm-hmm. Live your life. And again, if you're doing those things, you're probably pretty consistent with your Sunday attendance as well. Mm-hmm. So it's just you need community. It doesn't have to be this big thing. A simple plan that you can actually ask and call people to. That's what you should do.
Yep.
Next one. This is one I see a lot, especially with our church planning stuff. And, I'll just say it. Don't start your church planning journey with a traditional service. So here's what happens. People are like, I'm going to plant a church. And so they start a service. And maybe they have a guy playing acoustic guitar, or they do music, and they have a traditional preaching thing as they start doing everything else. That's not what you want to do, because in people's mind, you could say you haven't planted yet, mm-hmm. but you have. Now, I think Here's what I would do. If you're planting, go to practicalplanting.com/launch, buy our course. I think we made it. Obviously, we said this. I think it's the best $149 you're going to spend in the first year of your church plant. I just think that.
Yeah.
You will just do that. What should I do instead of a service? Go watch that and go do what it says. Now, that being said, we're not saying don't consistently gather and do things, but if you're like, hey, we're going to plant a church and you do a normal service, well, how are you going to start to build a culture, a DNA, talk about your vision and values? Because the thing is, you've got to get core people involved and invested so that the church can thrive. So obviously, if a new person comes to your church, well, they only come to a Sunday service if you've already established. But by then, you have like a culture and a vibe, and people are on mission. They know what they're doing. In the beginning, people don't. And so if you have like a service that you do every week in your house or whatever, that's kind of quote unquote traditional, and then you have another thing that you ask them to come through, and like it just like to keep it short, don't say I'm going to plant a church, start doing a service and doing all these other things. A service is not the first thing that you need to do in order to help to plant a healthy church.
Yep. People need to, if they're joining a launch team, they need to be able to build community, and that's going to the relationships they build are going to have a much bigger impact on if they stick and stay than if they can just get into a church service as soon as possible.
Yep.
And so I never understood the whole church planting plan where it's like we do Bible studies or groups, and then we start meeting weekly for services, and then we launch. It's like, well, you launched.
Right.
Weekly services means you got a church if you're inviting people to a weekly service. Now, it doesn't mean you can't gather weekly, but having it look the exact same pre-launch and post-launch, it's not just... It looks odd to your people, and it's confusing to communicate. And so have there be some change from pre-launch to post-launch, but not like you said, not asking people to come to a group and then go to something on Sunday and doing all these things before you even launch.
Yeah, so we have a lot of episodes of what to do pre-launch. Again, the course is the best thing you can do, but don't just say, hey, we're going to start a church. Let me start a Sunday service or whatever, a weekly service, and do all these other things. Again, the thought is, if I just preach and teach the Bible, people will come. Because that's what like some of the church plants that just like explode out of nowhere because they also have a really gifted communicator do, and so we just feel like that's all I got to do, and that's not going to set you up for long-term success. What it's going to do is it's going to keep you less than 25 people for a long time, and if that's fine, if that's what you want to do, that's fine. But if that's not what you want to do, don't just start with a service right away. That just won't get you where you want to go.
Yep.
Next one is doing message collab. Do a message collab with somebody or with people. So we started doing this not in the beginning, but it's what we do now. And so, with our staff, after staff meeting, we go through. Again, we have other episodes. We have so many episodes. So I know that's not really helpful because I can't like give you the specific number. We've got episodes on sermon prep and whatever. Just listen to all of them. Yep. But one of the things is, you got to be ahead at least a week so that you can talk through the sermon, not the week of. But have people that you give feedback on because it makes it a lot better. Again, for us, a couple of weeks before the Sunday it's given, I don't like preach it, but we're like in the room. Everyone has my notes, and I just literally talk through it. People give feedback on points that made sense or didn't make sense, stories that were helpful, things that were confusing, maybe something about the passage that they know that would be helpful to talk about. But have a process of going over your sermon, talking through your sermon with somebody before you give it on Sunday.
Yep. I mean, that's pretty much it. We need to get other people's viewpoints on it, get other people's takes. It's good, especially in the early days, but I would say do this forever. I mean, I don't think there's a point where you need to stop doing this, but it helps people not to just only be hearing your voice, and it helps you to kind of see things from different perspectives, because people, as they read verses and they're able to identify different things, and so get people's perspectives on it. It helps to get people's people can give examples and illustrations and stories that'll help you kind of identify things in your own life, and it'll just make your sermon prep process smoother.
Yep.
But it'll also make your sermons better. So it started now, even if you can only get it with one other person, and grow it as you grow.
Yeah, and honestly, it takes a lot of the pressure off too, because there's so many times like, is this even good?
Yeah.
Like, I don't even know if this is any good. Or knowing that, like for me, I write the sermon, do the study, all that stuff, make my outline, notes, whatever. And it's helpful to say, like, I need stories here. Can anyone give me examples? And it's just like knowing that it's not that I'm going to get feedback before I give it. And sometimes there's not a lot of feedback. It's like, okay, maybe this is fine. Sometimes it's like, no, this needs to be changed a lot because this is kind of confusing. It's just helpful to know that you're going, like when I'm writing these sermons, I'm like, I'm going to get feedback. So it's okay that as I'm writing it, it's not 100% like the best thing, like finished or polished, because I know I'm going to get feedback. So it just takes a lot of the pressure off of having to wondering every week, is this going to be any good?
Yeah, and I would say if there's something you want to do, which it should be, but start it and do it forever. But even if in the beginning it's not, you don't feel like it's very useful, because I think
Yeah.
especially if you have a team of, if no one else on your team has ever pastored or has ever preached or seminary, I think it'll take some time for them to get more comfortable sharing their opinions if they
Right.
feel like they may not know as much. And so in the long run it'll be really helpful, but even if in the first couple of months you feel like I'm not really gaining anything by this, keep doing it, and over time it will become really helpful, but just may not in the
And
beginning.
real quick, how we do it, there's lots of different ways to do it. We've tried it various ways. We don't have people like study the passage and everyone bring their ideas.
Mhm.
Me personally, I found that's unhelpful because the person who's preaching the sermon needs to be the one who owns it. And and so having to preach like someone else's point, it just doesn't work. So what we do is like, I'll go in, or whoever's preaching, have written, the sermon, and you give feedback. Like, so you don't have to study ahead of time. It's like, this doesn't make sense. Or if you know something about the passage, you share it. Or this is helpful. So like, do the work, kind of pretty much write the sermon, and then give feedback on the sermon.
Yep.
Let someone tell you what to do. Let's see. Here's the next one. Partner with an established organization. So put it this way: for serving your community, it is always better to partner with an established organization than try to create something on your own. And it's fine. And maybe in our culture we like to start new things and be unique and blah blah blah. It sounds cool to be like, hey, we're doing this thing, but somebody's already more effective. Whatever the way you want to serve your community or city, there's going to be a nonprofit, a charity, or someone who's already doing it.
Yep.
And so partnering with them, to accomplish what it is you want to accomplish makes it better. It makes the serving a lot better because, like, if you want to serve somewhere, you do what they tell you instead of you trying to figure out where to go. And so trying to find, and this is hard, and we're still in the process of it, but although seems like we found one organization that we really are going to be doing some long-term stuff with. The ultimate goal, I think, in our opinion, is just finding a handful of stuff that you do consistently, so that you can build a relationship and it's not this one-off thing. So it starts by serving in various organizations to find ones that work well with you, but don't feel like, again, like a discipleship plan has to be amazing. Don't feel like you got to serve all of these crazy things. Again, we look at big churches and they do a lot of stuff because they're big, and so they can do a lot of stuff.
Yeah.
I would say, man, focus just on one, maybe two organizations, and that's it. And just build a relationship with them in the community and the ways that they serve instead of feeling like you got to do everything. Partner with people who are already doing what you want to do.
Yeah, I mean, we all want to do our own thing and have an impact on the community, which is great. But the biggest way you're actually going to have an impact, even though it maybe like look a little less sexy from like you talking about it publicly, is to partner with someone who's already doing it and come alongside them. Like in organizations I've worked with in the past, the most effective churches that helped those organizations were the ones that were consistently doing something with them and not just showing up once, doing something and then backing off and going somewhere else. But it's people doing something all the time. And granted, the most of the time, the organization got the credit, not the church. It's just going to happen. I mean, your church obviously knows what they're doing, but it's not like you're going to get a lot of public recognition for it, whatever. But obviously, if you're trying to just help your community, partnering alongside someone who's been there, who knows what the community actually needs and knows how to serve in this whatever area you're most passionate about, is going to be much more effective, not just for the people you're serving, but also for your own people and helping them get out there as well, than you trying to coordinate everything on your own. So.
And it also how people actually like want to sign up and do it, because it's not some random thing. Like, so for us, there's this there's an organization here in Raleigh, and the gospel centered, whatever, and they feed communities and they talk about Jesus, whatever. So we've just did on our second like food drive for them, and then later this month we're going to be doing like a serve day in one of the communities, and people are going to be signed up and excited for it because it's not some random thing, and we're going to do it again with the same organization, so people know what to expect and they have some buy-in, especially if you can capture stories and pictures or like an interview with like the leader of the nonprofit and share it with your church, or have them come and share at the end of service or whatever. But finding ways to get connected with an organization instead of trying to figure something out on your own, it just goes, especially when you're new and you don't have a lot of people. Like, if it doesn't go well, people are going to be less likely to serve in the future. So just find someone who's already doing it and get connected there.
Yep.
Here's another one. Have a church planning budget from day one. So if you want to plan a church, even the last episode, we talked about residencies and everything. Man, it's all about money. That's why you need to know if your people are giving money. So you could, like, the money tells you everything you need to know about people's seriousness and if they're going to do it.
Yeah.
And so if you want to plan churches, have it in the budget from the beginning, a certain percentage that that is going from church planting, so that it's just normal as you grow and as your budget increases. It's not weird, like you're already doing it, so you don't have to like carve out this new line item that wasn't there before. It can just grow as your giving increases. But if you want to plant a church and there's no financial commitment, you will not do it. And if you just assume one day, well, I'm going to plant a church, you'll run into the issues that we talked about in a previous episode of the churches that want to plant churches but then never give any money, so they never actually do it. So it doesn't have to be big, but just set the habit now of sending and saving money for church plants, so that is just going to be something you do in the future.
Yeah, I mean, hopefully this isn't the most controversial thing, but I would say if you say you want to plant a church but don't have a budget for it, I would say you don't actually want to plant a church. I would say that you like the idea of planting a church, but don't actually want to do the work. And so, even if it's a small budget, we're not saying you need to fully fund your first church plant and give them everything they need. But even if you have a small money, a bit of money that you set aside each month, that can grow over time, or that you can increase as budget increases, it just shows that you are putting in some of the effort that will go into you planting a church in the future. And so set some money aside, talk to your board, your management team, whatever, figure out what that could be. If you've already launched and haven't done this, start it as soon as you can get everyone on board, and do everything you can to get everyone on board. Like, this is an important thing if you want to plant a church. If you don't, then don't. But if you want to say that you're a church planting church, you have to have some sort of money in the budget for it, or else it's just not going to happen.
That's right.
So
practical church planning. If you want to practically plant a church, get some money involved.
That's right.
That was number 10. Coming to the end here, so now I know the numbers again. Number
Yes.
11, second to last.
Yep.
Is that you should send quarterly giving statements, not yearly giving statements. So that's the traditional thing. At the end of the year, you send people their giving statements so that they can do the tax thing, blah, blah.
Which still do. We're not saying
Yes,
don't do that,
do that
but on
every-
top of it.
But every quarter, it's non-intrusive. It's a way to remind people about their giving. You can send a little blurb. We talked about this in other episodes. Like, send a little blurb, some vision or some things that you're celebrating. Talk about the budget year to date, where it is. Also include how much they have given, and it's just a reminder. Hey, here's what you've given. Sometimes often people think they've given more than they have.
Yep.
And so that can encourage that. It's a way to keep it in front of your people. And it's honestly, the more proactive you are talking about money with your church, the more people are going to trust you and give. So when they don't have to wait to ask, like, hey, how are things going? Like, can I see the budget? Can I see, like, you just do it without people asking. It's like, oh, they actually care, like they actually take this seriously. So we talk about money, we send quarterly giving statements, and it just keeps it in front of the people. But also it does encourage them to give, because they, especially if you're a little short or if you're above and you can celebrate, hey, here are things that are going well, people want to give to that. And so send a quarterly giving statement with just a couple of wins or things about the church and with their individual, how much they've given year to date as well.
Yep. It really allows you to, like you said, present wins to people in a way that they're probably more likely to see, like newsletters and things like that. Obviously, we talk about all the time. You should do, but there's going to come a time where people, obviously, readership kind of declines a little bit and things like that. But if people, almost everyone will open a giving statement and will look at it, and so that allows you to kind of get another opportunity to get in front of your people a little more, and to talk about money, which, I mean, we would all agree is an important thing to be talking about. And so it allows people to see what they've been giving. Like you said, most people, when they set up automated giving, especially if you've been going for maybe a couple years, it's just out of sight, out of mind. It comes out, don't even really think about it, don't really think about what it adds up to. And so to put that in front of them, not that we put it in front of them as a way to say, you need to up it, or it's as a negative thing, but it just allows people to see, and allows people to see where they're at, how much they're impacting the church, where we include, I don't know if you said this, but we include our church budget and like where we've spent year to date and what we've brought in and what we spent year to date, so people know kind of the church finances every quarter, and it just allows people to stay in front of people when it comes to financial issues.
And your bigger financial donors will appreciate this, because people that give a lot of money are used to wanting to make sure their money is being used wisely, and they get stuff all the time. And so that'll just encourage them to continue to do that.
Yep.
So send quarterly giving statements. And last but not least, everyone should do a service run through. So
Every week.
Regardless of how many people are in the band or how many people are on stage, whatever, you want to get into. Some of this is just creating habits of running through your service so that you know everything will go smoothly. And then this allows, too, when things don't go smoothly or if you need to change things up, because everyone knows what to expect, or knows like that's going to be on stage, and the sound people knows what's happening. It's not weird if things go a little off script. I mean, it's just like, I don't know, playing an instrument or whatever. If you learn how to play it, you know when you can break the rules and not.
Yeah.
But if you don't, and you're so nervous that everything's going to go the way it's supposed to go, well, then if you're not prepared, then when you talk about the Holy Spirit moving, you're not going to want to know what to do about anything. So we do this every week. And granted, we have a full band and live stream and that sort of thing, but we've always done that. Is that we go through the entire service, so from the worship to the next steps. I mean, I don't preach the message, but we click through the slides, all of it. We make sure the cameras are set, and so when it starts, there's not this like, oh, we hope this goes well.
Yeah.
And, when you're smaller, it's fine. Like this past Sunday, we had so many things happen. And it was not normal, so it was fine. And people knew, and like our drummer was sick, so he came, but then he left. And then the guitar player, his string broke. And then the live stream thing was weird, and then the sound wasn't coming. It was just like everything was just not.
Yeah.
It was awful, but it was an aberration. It wasn't weird. People know that's not a normal thing, and I think it speaks to like, hey, do they even know what they're doing here? And as we've said in other episodes, we think Sundays are really important. Like we are pro a good Sunday service, and you got to do a run through, even if there's not a lot of people involved, to get yourself in the habit of making sure things are going to go the way that you want them to go.
Yeah, I mean, there's going to be hiccups that you run into along the way that doing a run through really helps iron out. Like during run through, the band actually plays through every song.
Yep. Screens person does that.
Yep.
Lights,
Yeah, exactly.
everything.
Yeah, we go through the lyrics even if the band doesn't need them. The transitions, we need to do them live, and if someone's kind of goofing around a little bit, we go back and we need to actually do it like we would live. And so if someone's dragging behind a little bit or out in the lobby, we gotta wait until they're back in here to go. In other words, we don't like to just assume things are gonna go fine, and so we skip over this part of run through. We need to go through the entire service, outside of Dylan preaching the entire message, to make sure everything is ironed out. And this really helps when you get someone new coming in. Like if you get someone new, maybe doing like next steps or announcements, or someone new in the band, it helps them see what they're supposed to be doing and not just assume that they know what to do. And so it helps in every area, but it really helps Sunday mornings. You get more comfortable on Sunday mornings, and it helps them run smoother, and it helps take the stress off of you on Sundays of worrying about everything that's going to happen.
Especially for new people, it really sets the tone and the culture right away, because I know, they expect me to like be ready. And like, let's be honest, it's frustrating to no end when easy things are missed.
Oh, yeah.
And how are you ever going to fix them unless you have a dedicated time where we actually go through this, and if it doesn't go well, we redo it really quickly to make sure that things are not missed. Like there's just no reason there's no reason for us to be lazy and not care. If a rock concert or anywhere else you go, a play, they do run-throughs, they do practices.
Yep. What
we do is more important than that. If you would agree, then I don't understand how you would just show up and we'll just figure it out.
Assume it'll go, yeah.
Because it will not.
Prepare.
So
Over-prepare.
So those are 12 opinions church planners need to hear. It's probably one of the longest episodes we've done in a while.
Probably, yeah.
So thanks for joining us and being with us at the end. Again, you can go to practicalplanning.com. That's our site to get a lot of resources. You can also find the launch team course there. And if you're on Facebook, join the Practical Church Planting Facebook group. There's over 1,000 pastors and planters in there. People ask questions, and it's a lot of fun.
Yep.
And thanks for listening. We'll be with you next time on Practical Church Planting.